All righty. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Vanessa Mio, and I am the Advocacy and Education Specialist here at Park Pride. I first want to express my gratitude to each and every one of you for choosing to share your time with us this evening. Trust me, we will make it worth your while. This is our second Informed Advocacy session. Our first session was held back in March, where we discussed the creation of a natural areas team within the Department of Parks and Rec. Their advocates learned more about recent land acquisitions, which include more forested areas, and highlighted the need for specially trained management of these areas. As you already know, you're in for a special treat tonight as we are joined by two organizations dedicated to ensuring that both Atlanta residents and our city officials are well informed. But before we jump to the program, I wanted to cover some house rules. We will be hearing from three speakers tonight. During each presentation, feel free to drop any questions that come to mind in the chat. After each speaker, we'll be having a brief Q&A where I will read off the posted questions, or you could just raise your virtual hand, unmute yourself, and ask directly. At the end of all presentations, we will have a final Q&A, followed by announcements and closing remarks. If you have any ideas for future Informed Advocate sessions, please feel free to share them there at that time as well. So tonight's talk will be recorded and posted for later viewing if you wanted to just go back and listen or share with some other folks. And once again, thank you so much for being here and for your commitment to your neighborhoods and our city. We appreciate your questions and participation in the dialogue. And with that, let's get started. As many of you know, or maybe don't know, Park Pride has been around for 35 years. We are dedicated to engaging communities, to advocate the power of parks. We do so through various programs, such as our volunteer program, grants, and just this, our education and advocacy. Informed Advocates came about as just an opportunity for us to share what's happening with folks and for people to be able to ask questions and just get a better understanding of what's happening within the city. As I shared earlier, we have three speakers tonight. The first will be Kyle Kessler, who is the Policy and Research Director for the Center for Civic Innovation. We also have Jeremiah Jones, who will be covering transportation budget, and he is the Advocacy Programs Coordinator at Propel ATL. And last but not least, we have Michael Hallecky, who I will add, it's his birthday today, so we're so thankful that he's sharing it with us. Michael is the Executive Director at Park Pride, and we'll also cover ways that you can show up and how to expand the public engagement on the budget. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to turn it over to Kyle.
Thanks, Vanessa. Let me get started. All right, good evening, everyone. As Vanessa said, my name is Kyle Kessler, Policy and Research Director at Center for Civic Innovation, and I'll be talking through an overview of the city's budget overall. So for those of you who don't know the Center for Civic Innovation, our vision is to have a more effective and just public policy that reflects the needs and voices of people in Atlanta most impacted by social and economic inequality. And that plays out in park space as well as in transportation systems. So I think it's great to be a part of this conversation. If you're interested in following us on social media, our handle on all channels is Civic Atlanta. So I'm going to give you an overview. First off, make sure that you know some terms related to the budget, understand where your money is going to our local governments, how the city of Atlanta in particular is spending your money, and then how you can impact that spending decision. So first up, let's talk about some key terms related to the budget and budget processes. So first off, budget. Obviously, that's what we're here to talk about, the budget. So a budget is a document prepared by a government or other government-like entity, such as MARTA, the Atlanta Housing Authority, Invest Atlanta, the Beltline, that presents its anticipated revenues and proposed spending for the coming fiscal year. So this is important to know that at our local levels, all of our budgets need to be balanced. So the document is both talking about how much money is coming in and trying to equate that with how much they propose to spend in any given year. Now on that last slide, I mentioned fiscal year. That's a term that is used in budget conversations. That's a 12-month period, but not necessarily a calendar year, that governments and businesses use for their financial reporting and budget purposes. Our different local governments have different fiscal years, but there's always some local government somewhere in the Metro Atlanta region that's working on their budget at a given time. Today, we'll mainly be talking about the City of Atlanta budget, specifically because it's coming up for a new fiscal year for the City of Atlanta, which starts on July 1st. So as I mentioned, there's folks working on the budget all the time. It's part of this overall budget cycle, and it's that process that local governments go through to create and approve their budgets. Typically, the budget is drafted by the administrative branch, so the mayor, for instance, of the City of Atlanta, or the superintendent of the public school system, the governor of the state of Georgia. And then that draft budget or proposed budget is presented to the legislative branch for their review, revision, and approval. Now, this doesn't happen overnight. It can take many months to prepare these documents that are both behind the scenes, and then eventually that budget proposal becomes public, and that's where we are in the process right now in the City of Atlanta. Now, once the budget's approved for the year, it's time to start working on next year's budget. So as soon as something gets adopted, there's revisions, there's amendments, and they're working towards the next year's budget. So part of those internal processes that come up with the budget, there's a lot of data collection, forecasting both for revenue and expenses, strategic planning to figure out how we want to spend our dollars, as well as that draft proposal from the administrative body to the legislative body. Then we get into the public process. If you subscribe to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, you might see a newspaper ad, some legal advertisements related to the budget, but there's also a series of public hearings. We'll see some video clips of some of those public hearings later on. And there's the opportunity for the public to provide comment on the budget. And then finally, the legislative body, in this case, the Atlanta City Council, will vote on the budget. Now, the budget is divided up into different categories, or funds in this case. Funds are the fiscal entities that are the self-balancing set of accounts. So it's regarding specific activities or things that the city is wanting to accomplish. And oftentimes there's restrictions or special regulations or limitations on how those dollars are spent, depending upon where the money is coming from and then how it's set up in those fund accounts. Today, I'll mainly be talking about the general fund. That's where the greatest opportunity is to flex the budget based upon the community's needs. There typically is a general fund along with a series of restricted funds that I'll touch on briefly. But the money, once again, in the general fund is the most flexible, so that's where folks on this call and elsewhere in the City of Atlanta can have the most impact on moving dollars in the way they want to see them spent. Now, two broad budget categories are operating budgets, which cover the day-to-day expenses necessary to deliver services to the residents of the City of Atlanta. Those costs return year after year, include things like employee wages, office supplies, and utilities. The other big category is capital budgets, which are for long-term investments like infrastructure and facility projects. These can include road construction, renovating parks or water treatment plants. And oftentimes these are paid off over time through a series of bond issuances. So when the City of Atlanta borrows money and then over time pays that money back. Those capital budgets can take many years to process. So we'll mainly be talking about the operating budget, which is where the focus at the City of Atlanta at City Hall is right now. So I mentioned before, revenue expenses, trying to balance those two things. So the revenue is the money that the local governments are taking in to finance their operations. Sources of this include taxes, fees, receipts collected from various services that the city provides, and then the expenses are the things that we spend the money on. That includes employee salaries, as I mentioned, but also contracts for goods and services and debt payments for things like those bonds. As I mentioned before, local governments typically have to balance their budgets between the revenues and the expenses. But in good years, we will save away some of our extra revenue to save for a rainy day as a reserve fund. And we can tap into that when the economy turns down. Now, differentiation between these two things, taxes and fees. Taxes are the means by which we raise money for any appropriate governmental purpose. And there's no requirement that a tax be spent on the service that's being provided or to pay for those activities. It's once the money comes in as a tax, it can be spent in whatever way. Fees, on the other hand, are the specific charges imposed for a specific purpose. So when we charge a fee for something, there has to be a correlation between the money coming in for that purpose and being spent back to pay for that purpose. So who is getting our money locally? So roughly half of the property taxes collected in the city of Atlanta are going to the Atlanta public school system. Approximately 1/4 are going to whichever county you happen to live in. If you're in DeKalb County or in Fulton County, and then the other quarter goes to the city of Atlanta. Now, within this quarter, the city of Atlanta has chosen to break out its millage rate, which is the term for this ratio of your property tax versus what the city is going to be charging you in property taxes. Break it out not just to the general operating, which has the most flexibility and general sort of use, but also to paying off bonds, so paying off that debt that the city has collected over the years, as well as appropriate for this conversation, roughly 2.5% of that overall tax dollar you might spend will be going to the Parks Improvement Fund and be paying for parks expenses, which I'm sure that Park Pride will get into later. Now, these percentages can vary based upon each year the local government setting the millage rate, as well as your particular property value and any exemptions you might have, whether it's a homestead exemption, a senior exemption, a disabled veteran exemption, or whatever. So these aren't exact numbers. That's why there's a little bit of a sort of variation. But in general, roughly half of our local tax dollars and property tax dollars are going to the school system, a quarter to the city of Atlanta, and the other quarter to the county. Now, in addition to property taxes, anytime you're buying service or goods in the city of Atlanta or across the state of Georgia, you're paying a sales tax. And that sales tax has been collected in the state of Georgia since 1951. Back then, back in the old times of 1951, there was just a statewide 3% sales tax rate. But over time, the state has allowed counties, cities, school boards, and other entities to collect sales taxes as well. These are called local option sales taxes, and they had to be voted on by residents in the area where that tax will be collected. And they're for a limited time, so we have to renew these taxes over time. Coincidentally, if you've already gone to vote in the election that's happening next Tuesday, or you haven't voted yet, on the ballot will be the municipal option sales tax, which is for water and sewer system improvements. But we also have local option sales taxes to help fund MARTA, transportation. We have a local option sales tax which helps offset our property taxes, so those aren't so high relative to the overall revenue for the city of Atlanta, as well as an educational special purpose local option sales tax that helps fund Atlanta public school system, and a transportation sales tax, or a T-SPLOST, which the city of Atlanta can use for transportation repairs and infrastructure projects. So all that together, for every dollar you spend in the city of Atlanta, there's 8.9 cents of sales tax collected. So as I mentioned, depending upon where the money's coming from and its source of revenue, there can be restrictions on where that money gets spent. And then the differentiation between operating budgets as well as capital budgets. Here's the overall fund structure for the city of Atlanta. So the three big categories: governmental, which is what we'll be talking about, or where there's the most ability to influence; the proprietary, which gets into some of those things where, for instance, every dollar that's spent at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport needs to flow back into the airport. Or the money that you pay for a trash pickup or for your water bill, that stays within that special fund. That doesn't get distributed across to other entities. There are also things like the pension fund, the folks who've retired from the city of Atlanta. That money is allocated for those employees. It's part of the overall budget, but it's not something that we can really shape or help fund transportation projects or parks projects or anything else. That's reserved for those uses. So that's where the fiduciary funds come in. But we'll mainly be talking about the general fund, where there's the most ability, but you can see here some of the other things, as well as the hotel motel tax fund, the rental car fund, the charge that's on your cell phone bill to help pay for E911 services. Those are all in the overall picture of budgets of the city of Atlanta. So overall, there's a typo in this. The overall budget, operating budget of the city of Atlanta is around $2.75 billion. And the largest fund in that group of funds, operating funds, is the general fund. So we'll start digging into that next, but you can see here what the relative amount of each of these other funds is on this slide. So what's in the general fund? So the general fund for this year, the proposed general fund for the city of Atlanta is $854 million, which roughly of the 500,000 residents in the city of Atlanta, that's roughly $1,700 per resident in planned expenses for the city. So where's that money coming in for the city? How's that revenue coming in? That's the vast majority. The largest percentage of money that's coming in is in property taxes. Second is those sales taxes, those local option sales taxes, which offset property taxes. Then your all of the entities that are public utilities are paying in. So Georgia Power is paying a tax, for instance. When you're drinking alcoholic beverages, you can know that some of that money is helping pay for city services and coming into the general fund as well. License and permits. So if you're building a building or needing the business license, that comes in as a percentage of the revenue. And then everything else sort of makes up the whole. But overall, that's how we get the $854 million that the city of Atlanta is planning to spend this coming year. Now, how the city of Atlanta chooses to set up its expenses, which I'll get to the next slide, is by department. So looking at a department by department basis, the largest portion of the city of Atlanta's expenses are for the police department. Second is the fire rescue department. So public safety has a large portion of the city of Atlanta's overall budget. Germane to this conversation, parks and recreation is the third largest departmental operating budget, followed by transportation. Then there's a whole series of other departments and offices. So whether that's the Department of City Planning, whether it's our municipal court system, the mayor's executive offices, such as Office of Cultural Affairs, Office of Film and Entertainment, all of the rest of that is roughly 29% of the budget. And then there's a big chunk as well that's non-departmental. So that's paying off debt that the city's collected. It's paying for insurance, paying for a variety of other things that can't easily be assigned just to one department, but are expenses that the city has. So some of the highlights of this year's proposed budget. Overall, as I mentioned before, which wasn't correct on the slide, it's a $2.75 billion overall operating budget. A chunk of that is $24 million, which will be an increase in employee pay, trying to raise salaries and benefits for employees so the city can be fully staffed and it can be competitive in the job market as it exists right now. $17 million for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. This is the first year that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is being funded at the full 2% amount, which has been being built up over time. But that is one of the highlights of this year's budget, as well as $3 million for more Year of the Youth programming. As the mayor said, every year is the Year of the Youth, but this year there's a dedication of $3 million towards that. Now, what's not in the city of Atlanta's general fund budget, I want to make sure that we're clear on some stuff that isn't covered with what I shared before. One, education. So Atlanta Public Schools has its own budget. As shown before, they get roughly half of the property tax dollars, as well as 1 cent can go towards school capital projects. So that's not included here. If you're interested in it, the Atlanta Public School System is also going through their budget process right now. Their fiscal year starts on July 1. So that can be a great conversation for you to have with your school board members or folks at the PTA or GO team. Transit is also not here. MARTA, the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority, has its own budget and funding streams. They also have a July 1st budget start, so you can pay attention to their board meetings and get involved in those hearings if you're interested in that. Health services, including mental health, are primarily funded by the county and the state, so that's not something that falls under the purview of the city of Atlanta, so that's not included here. And then, as I mentioned before, capital projects have a separate budget and their own timeline based upon the bond issuances or how long it takes to build out some of these projects. So whether it's a transportation project, it's a parks project, or something like the Public Safety Training Center that folks are aware of, those are not included in the operating budget of the city of Atlanta and isn't something that our city council is actively discussing right now. Those are discussed at different times of the year as those bonds are being issued or as projects are being completed and they're working on the project list for the next one. So then lastly, how can you impact this budget? What I'll tell you to do, the Center for Civic Innovation has a website, ATLDOT.org, where you can get much more detail about each of these budgets and the components of it than I've been able to go through here today. So rather than these big other categories, you can start to filter down and see more specifically how these dollars are being proposed to be spent. There is a public budget hearing coming up on May the 21st at City Hall. So I'd encourage you to go to it. And then, as I mentioned at the top, the Center for Civic Innovation, we are posting information about the budget in general, as well as some specific topics and departments on our social media accounts. So feel free to follow us on social media, and we will try to get you whatever information you desire. And my contact information is there as well, and hope to get some good questions and then can follow up with folks either here or afterwards. So that's what I've got, and I will unshare my screen and kick it back to Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Kyle. I'm going to actually open up the floor for any questions at this time. I know it was a lot. That was great information. And like you said, atlbudget.com or .org rather is a great resource. I like to jump on there to see what's happening, different departments. It's very clear, very easy to run through, and you get a host of information. So if you haven't checked this out yet, please do.
If you go to that link at the top, there's a budget calendar, and you can see when departments have their various hearings. Next week is the last week of those hearings, so lots of departments have already presented. If you click on the menu and see those departments, you can start to see specifically how many employees they're looking to add, what their budget increase is. You can watch the presentation. You can view the slide decks as well. We'll continue to supplement that information. But hopefully it's a good resource. And I will shout out my colleague on the call, Will Finkelstein, who has helped pull that information together as well.
Thank you so much. So if there's no questions, if anything comes to you later on in the presentations, you will have an opportunity to ask Kyle questions then as well. But right now we're going to move on, and we're going to allow Jeremiah Jones from Propel ATL to share his screen and start his presentation.
Thank you, Vanessa. I'm excited that each and every one of you have joined us tonight on this call. We're going to jump into the transportation side of things. What you see right now is a graphic that we created for our budget campaign, playing off the common notion that Atlanta is full because of gridlock on our city streets. The conversation tonight, I don't want it to be about ATLDOT's efficacy. It's more about empowering them to act. We need the mayor to bolster ATLDOT's capacity to manage essential projects that can shift our transportation paradigm, projects that align with NACTO's principles of growth without congestion. It's our hope tonight that you would see why we still have outstanding projects that date back to 2015 and why we've probably only completed one Moving Atlanta Forward project. So to get this conversation started tonight, I want Councilmember Amidst to kick us off with his words from last week's budget hearing.
I could sing your praises as well, but I will not do that. I will be the bad guy today because as chairman of transportation, I think that's part of the job requirement. I am disappointed with this budget, and here's why. Let's talk about facts and let's talk about perceived realities, because actually our presumption becomes reality. I think it was last year we was talking about $17 million that was about to be removed out of your budget. You told us that you really didn't need it. You could find the money to get something done. The perceived reality is you haven't gotten anything done. That's the perceived reality.
So what is happening? As you see and hear in the video, there's rising skepticism if ATLDOT can execute projects given their current funding level. I'll have you know that transportation is top of mind of all of our council members, so much so, Council Member Overstreet pointed it out at last week's budget hearing. And here's what she had to say about it.
The truth is, we are here today more than, in abundance, the council in large numbers, more than any other budget session, because this is the most important thing and at the top of mind for us, what people are actually, our residents are actually calling us about on a regular basis. We spend an awful lot of time outside of any time we're at City Hall and we're on the streets. This is what we hear about. Let me just give you a little list of some of the major people that have come before us, and we were skeletal here at budget hearings.
Project delivery is top of mind for all of our council members. And our council members probably are echoing the similar sentiments that are probably being felt in this room this evening, the desire to see projects completed. And like many of you, Propel ATL deeply cares about transportation in Atlanta. So who is Propel ATL? For those of you who don't know, we are a transportation advocacy nonprofit, formerly known as the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition. In 2021, we merged with PEDS, Pedestrians Educating Drivers on Safety. And in 2022, we changed our name to Propel ATL to reflect the multiple modes of transportation to which we advocate for. And so we are a 33-year-old organization here in the city of Atlanta, and we have a vision to see an Atlanta where everyone moves safely, easily, and sustainably throughout the city. And we have a mission of transforming Atlanta streets into safe, inclusive, and thriving spaces for people to ride, walk, roll, or access public transit. And we accomplish our mission through policy advocacy and through our programming. And so advocacy for us involves actions to support, defend, or argue in favor of a policy. At its core, advocacy seeks to voice community concern and center the voices of the most vulnerable. Or even simply put, advocacy is a team sport. Here pictured, you will you see a picture of community members who gathered last year during our budget campaign, Ring the Bells. Advocacy is a team sport, and it can only be effective when people work together and have a clear and consistent unifying message that push towards a definitive goal. Last year during the budget process, we were successful as a community in getting $12 million added to the budget. And that was $1 million per district as discretionary transportation funds. And every council member signed and supported the legislation. Now, none of the projects that have been identified by council members for the $12 million have actually been completed yet. And this leads us back to the budget and Alex Wan's words last week at budget hearing.
Jumping off of where Councilmember Amos was, looking back, FY22, $63 million budget. FY23, that dropped by $6 million. 7, last year it dropped again to 50, and this year it's flat. I mean, it's really flat because the $2 million increase is, like you said, it's a consolidation from somewhere else. And yet you've got $110 million that you're going to deploy. I'm going to ask Councilmember Winston's question a different way. He asked whether you think you've got the right budget. I'm going to ask it in a way of, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that your budget ask is going to really help move the needle. It doesn't make sense to me because we've been dropping money from your account. It's flat from last year. The progress that we saw in the current fiscal year, I'm not convinced. Doesn't make sense to me how we're going to all of a sudden now flip a switch and really be able to deploy just because we're adding 5 more project managers or 10 more project managers.
So here's what our city's transportation budget looks like compared to similar sized cities like Atlanta. We are sitting about a third of other other DOTs around the U.S. This reduction of budget, we believe, directly hampers ATLD's ability to manage a growing list of urgent projects. It hampers their ability to plan and design safer streets to prevent the rising number of pedestrian deaths we are seeing each year. And we believe it hampers ATLDOT's ability to maintain streets in good repair. You'll also notice that there is a decrease in the personnel budget by $270,000. And yet next year in FY25, ATLDOT plans to add 46 people to their current 120 vacant roles. And out of that 46, they want to add only 30 of those roles are funded, and 25 of those roles are funded for 2025. You might also see that May of last year, we had 13 project managers in the city, and we've added 10 as of April, and the goal is to add 5 more as of July. We believe that project delivery is closely tied to the number of staff and their workload. As highlighted in the budget briefing, there's a concern regarding the current workload due to the low number of project managers that we have. There's a question of how many projects is each project manager currently handling. Historically, project managers have managed around 10 to 15 projects per person, whereas the optimal number is about 6 to 7 projects per project manager. And so increasing the number of project managers could reduce individual workloads and potentially lead to completion of more projects in FY25. There's also, you may have asked some questions about the numbers and the budgets and the funding and how they're going to hire more people than they actually have money for. Great question. There's this constant refrain from ATLDOT, and it's something that we heard last year as well, that although we have less money in the general fund compared to other cities our size, we have more money in capital funds for projects and for staffing. If this is the case, what's needed here is more clarity of the various funding sources available to the department. So what can you do? The next step, as alluded to earlier, in the budgeting process involves council providing amendments to the proposed budget. And council has until June to pass the budget. And so I think you can connect with your council members and their aides. All the council members know that transportation is the #1 priority of their constituents, but they still need to hear from us. They still need to hear from you, and the mayor needs to hear from us. One, I need you to offer up your concern. Offer your concern to your elected officials in conversation. And when you have those conversations, place your concern with constituent groups in your district. Use NPUs, neighborhood associations, CIDs, and local organizations' names when you talk with council. As in, or as in the picture you see in front of you, as in Connect 4, try to connect your issue to 4 groups in your district. This helps to show concern among a wider constituency. Secondly, you can offer your availability to give public comment or to lend your expertise to our council members. And 3, maintain your relationship with elected officials. We don't want it to be a regular occurrence where we only show up when we need something. Relationships matter, and relationships are where we get policies passed. And then lastly, celebrate wins. Find and celebrate the wins with your council members. This helps to build and maintain positive relationships. And so the public hearing, as was stated earlier, is May 21st from 6:15 to 7. And this is the opportunity for you to share your priorities with the city of Atlanta. This is your chance to share your priorities on the city budget and how and where you want to see your tax dollars being spent. Outside of budget talks, there are council meetings where you can go and give your input. Those happen twice a month. And there's also committee meetings. There's transportation committee meetings that happen twice a month that you can go to and give your public input on how you would like to see the money spent around the city of Atlanta. And so here's what we want at Propel. Here's what we're calling for. We want to see more people hired because we believe that people propel ATL. And so those are some of the asks that we are asking there on the screen. And so the question simply is, where do you want to see transportation improvements in your community? What project have you been waiting on to come to pass, as they might say? Yeah, we want to hear from you and let council hear from you on May 21st. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah. This was great. I also want to echo what you said about showing up to these meetings, how important it is to voice our concerns. As Overstreet stated, she's there to hear what we all have to say. So show up. The meeting dates are posted. And yeah.
And Vanessa, I might add that our executive director, Rebecca Cerna, is joining us in the chat, and she will jump in and help answer any of the questions that may come from people.
Awesome. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions at this time for Jeremiah or Rebecca from Propel ATL regarding transportation? I think everyone's just taking it all in, y'all. Means you're having very clear presentations, right?
Right.
Okay, so no more questions at this time. We're going to move on to Michael Hallecky from Park Pride.
Excellent. Well, it's good to be with you all here today. And before I kind of jump into my slides, I'm just going to talk for a few minutes because I'd like to give some context to this session. I really appreciated Kyle laying the groundwork for just demystifying the budget. And I also think it's also equally important to look beyond the budget because there's a number of other different conversations that affect the world that you live in and your specific neighborhood and in the city at large. And understanding how those pieces fit together, I think, is important. And some of what you'll hear from me today will focus on the budget, but it also connected to some of the other areas. So I wanted to thank Kyle for that. I also wanted to thank Jeremiah. I think I've come with a new appreciation for the use of video and giving council members a chance to make my points for me, because I think those videos that show Byron Amidst and Alex Wan and Marcy Overstreet are worth their weight in gold of really showing their frustration that sometimes, as you mentioned, is echoed by some of the constituents that they represent. I also want to recognize, and I think we feel the same way as you talk about your efforts with Atlanta DOT and our efforts with the Department of Parks and Recreation. I often say that Park Pride is the best friend of the Department of Parks and Recreation. Sometimes your best friend says things you don't want them to say and say them in context that you wish they'd keep their mouth shut. Sometimes you're saying things that your friend can't say. And I think we're that kind of friend. So I think we try to look at ways to try to add momentum and to catalyze a broader conversation. And that's one of the reasons we're here today. I also want to recognize Vanessa Mio on my team. And this whole Informed Advocate effort began with our first session that just opened up the conversation on Parks and Recreation. And when we're down at City Hall, both for the annual public hearing, but also throughout the time, we see folks from the Center for Civic Innovation and Propel ATL there. And sometimes we don't see many others. That sometimes it's a little lonely there. And Vanessa had noticed the fact that sometimes it's the same advocates that show up and we wind up hearing the same talking points from folks, but we're really not getting to a greater level of understanding or getting the public to get involved in these efforts in a way that they're articulating their own concerns and issues. And I think that's really what this session is all about. I'm hoping we'll kind of hit the floodgates where we'll hear from some of the folks on the call here today. Because I really think that I think we are celebrating our wins on the park side of things. We have, I think, an optimistic story to say that we're seeing some momentum and we want to keep that going and finish strong this budget cycle. But we also feel like the sleeping giant, we're looking to wake him or her up and get folks involved because we really see benefits both for our issue, but also for a better Atlanta as people are connecting transportation and parks and affordable housing and equity and all of these different issues together. So with that, I'll jump into kind of some of the things that I'd like to share. And I'm actually going to begin by referencing the fact that next week on Wednesday, they'll be announcing Trust for Public Land puts out their Park Score, which is an annual ranking of 100 U.S. cities. And I'll share that last year, I'm not going to tell you what we're going to be announced. That's for Trust for Public Land. But I will share that we're presently 28th out of 100 U.S. cities. Back in 2016, we were 51st. And this is a ranking of 100 U.S. cities across 5 indexed scores that's looking at acreage, it's looking at equity, it's looking at amenities, it's looking at access, and it's looking at investment. And so within those areas, we've gone from back in 2016 that we were just 1 above average out of 100 cities to these days where we're up at 28th in terms of where we're at. And again, I don't see anyone putting we're 28th on a t-shirt. That 28th is not something to be proud of. We have moved up a little bit. And part of the reason we moved up is this master plan that was done. It was completed in 2021. It's called Activate ATL, Parks and Recreation for All. It was done at the end of the Bottoms administration with full engagement of City Council. Park Pride played a very active role in the public engagement, including a statistically valid survey. And it provides a 10-year roadmap for where we want to be. It's also telling that before that plan was adopted, we had gone 10 years without a plan at all. So we were kind of in this no man's land. And we started with a plan to figure out where we needed to get to, but didn't really have a clear sense of how we were going to get there. We had this idea that we needed to invest in our park and recreation assets. We needed to connect the parks and recreation resources. And I'll mention, you'll see a slide in just a minute that talks about the trail plan that the City of Atlanta is undertaking that they complement to Activate ATL, that's really looking at the trail connectivity for our city and the range of different ways of making the city more walkable, bikeable, and more connected. And then the third one is to grow the park system, that when you look at the growth that's anticipated over the next 10 years, if we're not growing the acreage of park space, we're in some ways, we're shrinking per capita park space for our city. So growing the park system has been an important part of this as well. Let's go on to our next slide. And I will share that as we look at kind of where we've gone since Activate ATL, there's 2 things that I wanted to highlight. One is that the election of Andre Dickens and his efforts to try to move forward from where we had been previously has really been a marked change. We've seen that growing of park acreage that really has taken off. We have seen bringing in Commissioner Justin Cutler, who there was a national search to bring in a parks commissioner who hit the ground running. Park Pride had been involved in an effort with a dozen other organizations that interviewed all the mayoral candidates. We hosted a mayoral forum, and we invited whoever got elected to work with us on an ongoing basis and not just every 4 years. Mayor Andre Dickens created the Green Space Advisory Council, kind of thought of as the Green Cabinet for the mayor that meets on a quarterly basis. We have a meeting on Monday with him where it has been a chance to try to surface some of the different issues of having a department that's been underfunded and under-resourced, and much in the way that Jeremiah described with Atlanta DOT, did not have the resources to perform as people were expecting, including Atlanta City Council. Much of that we've been seeing some movement. And so this slide here shows last year our big win was an effort to come up with dedicated funding for maintenance. And if you look at that middle row on millage funding, and this is the property taxes that Kyle mentioned, we went up to a level of $16 million that had been fairly static over a number of years, and it was doubled to $32 million. 14 of that $16 million goes to maintenance of parks, trails, and rec centers. And it also was an action that actually met with near unanimous support from Atlanta City Council, 12 council members voting in support and 4 abstaining. So that was a huge change that you can see that has actually given us dollars beyond the budget, because until that change with the millage, the only place that we had dollars for park maintenance was from the general fund. As we've seen this increase, it's also been important to continue to grow the general fund support for the Parks and Recreation Department, looking at us compared to other cities and trying to become a top 10 city in that park score evaluation. Funding has been one of the biggest things that's been holding us back. And so getting the doubling of the Park Improvement Fund, getting the lion's share of those dollars going towards maintenance has been a huge win. The big concern this year was to make sure there was no backsliding, because we were concerned that as you actually have a dedicated source and as all the departments are competing for resources, that there may be a concern that, well, Parks got theirs, so we can back off. When in fact, the need was really to supplement, not supplant, has been kind of our phrase and something we've been working on. So this is looking at kind of the trajectory of what we had seen up until this point, where between FY 2022 and 23, largely static. When we look at the change that happened from 23 to 2024, we see a $3 million increase. That was the same year that we doubled the Park Improvement Fund. That other line on other funding looks at things like impact fees that have a Parks and Recreation allocation. So whereas we're adding density to the city, we're adding funding in those geographic areas to offset that increased density with more parkland. Let's go on to the next slide. So this is a snapshot of where we're at now. We're now at 51 million. I'll share just in contrast, I've been at Park Pride for a little over 10 years. And when I came to the organization, funding for parks was around 32 million. So we have seen a steady increase. Last year, there was a $3 million increase. This year, there's a $4 million, $4.1 million increase. So we do see that we are doing a good job of adding dollars. I also will mention that when you look at the philanthropic side of things, that Atlanta, compared to other national cities, is within the top 5 of the cities that receive the most dollars in terms of philanthropy. And again, I would say that part of our strategy has not been a public or private, but really a both-and strategy that needs both of those efforts. And we found that there has been some synergy between the two to make sure that we're raising dollars from the private sector. Park Pride has done a lot over the past couple of years to grow our our efforts through our Parks for All campaign to bring dollars to community-led park investments. But all of that has been bolstered by efforts to actually step up our efforts on maintenance. This also highlights some of the different accomplishments. And I did want to highlight some of the efforts on park security. So there's been an analysis looking at the areas that have the highest amount of both property crime as well as physical crime, and identifying areas that need greater security within those parks. So the city has completed the second phase of security camera installations, 253 cameras installed in 7 community parks. We've acquired over 83 acres of parkland. And I will share that over the past 3 years, we've acquired 580 acres of parkland, which prior to the past 3 years, it was very static. There's also been efforts on rec programming with 18 new vendors that have been added for after school, teen, and senior programming. And again, that's been an increase from 14 in FY 23 and 32 in FY 2024. There's a lot of other things that have been happening in terms of what's new in terms of a summer food program, expanded youth athletics, including girls flag football, youth soccer and lacrosse, pickleball courts. Who doesn't love pickleball courts? So we're seeing an expansion of pickleball courts within the city. So lots of good things that are happening. If we'll go on to our next slide, and I do want to mention that we started off early this year with showing up at the agency that oversees Parks and Recreation, Community Development, and Human Services, that's led by Jason Winston. And we had folks showing up, and our two different messages were, number one, that we needed to continue to grow the parks budget and continue to invest through the general fund in park maintenance overall. And then the second part was to look at the fact that with this expansion of acreage that we've seen in the city, 580 acres, 80% of that are forested areas, largely because of the tree trust fund that's being used to acquire forested areas of land that are adding to the park's inventory. And so we've recognized a need, and I think the commissioner has seen a need to make sure that the city recognizes this growing segment of the park's inventory, to make sure that we're not just focusing on cutting the grass and tipping the trash cans and some of the things that are needed in our more traditional parks, but also looking at an area that's an expanding area for the city in natural resources. So we advocated for hiring a director of natural resources, and creating a natural areas team. And the language that's here in these bullets is actually pulled from the budget document itself. So in the budget, it's committing to hire a director of natural resources, consolidating forestry, natural areas, and arborist teams to align with a natural resources office. It's coordinating natural areas management efforts, and there are ways of looking citywide at Watershed has significant assets of forested areas, and how do we look at a citywide natural areas plan? And then looking at ways that we're increasing investment in and the number of invasive plant removal projects. So really getting into the business of not just thinking that natural areas take care of themselves, because they don't. We need to manage those areas and manage the invasives. This helps for the tree health. It also improves sight lines. It makes it so that areas are more inviting for people to go and enjoy, so they're safer areas. And it also helps to address some of the issues of illegal dumping and things along those lines that happen in properties that look like they're unmanaged. So we feel like this is something that is less than dollars and cents, but more of changing the diversity of the department. And I did want to mention that I noticed that Commissioner Justin Cutler had shown up on this call and may be listening in. And I just want to recognize the fact that much of my time working at Park Pride, I feel like we were working around the city, and through a combination of the leadership of the mayor, the stuff that we've been able to bring to the mayor with the Green Space Advisory Council, and working with a commissioner who has been willing to engage with the advocacy community, I'm very hopeful that we will continue to make progress in moving up in that park score, and more importantly, looking at ways that it's actually making it so we have a park system that meets the community's needs in all the areas that we serve. So that's a little bit about kind of what I see. The last thing that I'll mention before we go into kind of any questions for me and then the broader group is, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that our efforts really we work on a citywide effort, but really the magic happens with Park Pride with our neighborhood Friends of the Park groups. And sometimes that advocacy is hyper-local. And though what you'll see from us are looking at the systemic efforts of looking at maintenance issues, and maintenance is also an equity issue, because when you're not, when you don't have private entities that are actually helping to provide supplemental support, then there is also an issue of how that's felt across the city as a whole. We have to advise friends groups who are looking to make sure that they're pressing their advocacy agenda on a hyper-localized effort. And I think that's yet another example of how all this fits. So we invite friends groups to show up, and they often do, to show examples on this example with natural resources of how this isn't just a citywide issue, it's also a local issue. But I also wanted to acknowledge that sometimes some of the progress is hyper-local and involves those individual city council members, those specific NPUs, as well as the team within DPR that's responding to those issues in those areas. And we're a resource on that side of things. So I wanted to acknowledge that. And as we get into the Q&A, that if we get into places where it would be helpful for us to advise and coach groups that are looking at things that are specific to their area and specific issues, we're happy to work with you on those efforts, and that's what we do at Park Pride. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. And I believe you'll be, are there any questions for Michael regarding parks or Park Pride? what's happening in the city in regards to budget. Antoine, we have a question from Antoine.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I just got a quick question about partnerships, more partnership with the Park and Rec, because I have a nonprofit myself. We have a mental organization, and we would definitely love to partner with more parks to the recreations, because I grew up in the park and recreation, so I know what it does for you as a kid, as a person, as a human being. So I would love to partner with the Parks and Recreation, because our organization, we move around the whole city. So we deal with kids inside the school, outside the school, in their home. We meet the kids where they at. So this is something that's very, very needed. And I'm glad that y'all actually put this out there for the public to actually come in and speak. That's why I made it my business to actually speak and ask a question. And then I got one more question about the 3 million that's dedicated to the year of the youth. What does that look like? Does anybody know what does that look like? How does that broke down?
So I can answer the first question. I will share that I put my email in the chat, and if you want to reach out to me directly, I would love to connect you to the folks with the Department of Parks and Recreation. And I do know that in addition to Commissioner Justin Cutler, that there is a Deputy Commissioner of Partnerships that works with nonprofits, and we've had a number of conversations about ways to engage with folks on the recreation side of things. So I'd be happy to make a connection for you on that front. And I don't know if there's anyone on the call that knows more about the Year of the Youth, the $3 million that programming that has been identified. I do know from the experiences last year and just how this came up in the Green Space Advisory Council that there was kind of a effort within the mayor's cabinet to look at things. So it was looking across different departments of ways that they could engage in the Year of the Youth. And I'm happy, again, if you follow up with me to find out the answers to that question and to follow up with more detailed where that falls. I know that Parks and Recreation has been a very active part of the Year of the Youth effort, but I don't know the specifics for the current budget where those dollars are deployed.
Yeah, Michael, I'll chime in a little bit too. So the budget document doesn't give us all the details, but based upon how the city has operated in the past, they have also had opportunities to work with nonprofit organizations, and there's been some contract for services provided as well. So that could be a piece of that $3 million. So would love to connect, and if we can get more information, we can share that with you too.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's all I wanted to know, because we're creating this ecosystem. We're getting a lot of training, from compassion training to empathy, with Grady and Emory University. So we would definitely like to partner up and keep the training and stuff going. So thank y'all so much.
Thank you, Antoine.
Thank you.
Question.
I also want to acknowledge that Vanessa put a link to the Year of the Youth page that the city has created. So I think that might be another resource. But as I said, if you'll follow up with me, I'll be happy to see what I can get further on your question, as well as to make some connections for you and the work that your nonprofit does, and make sure you're talking to the right people.
All righty. Are there any other questions? For anything as a city budget as a whole, for transportation, for parks? While those questions come in, I just wanted to go ahead and just share that Trails ATL, they are having a citywide trail plan connecting survey, actually. So they're going through a planning process right now. The survey is open for everyone within Atlanta, just so that they can have a better idea of what we want, what we need. It's a very brief survey. I took it myself. It took just a few minutes, asking, what area you live in, what you use the paths and trails for, and what you would like to see. So I have the website there, as well as a QR code if you wanted to take a picture of that and connect. Also, both Kyle and Jeremiah and Michael also all spoke to this. We'd like to welcome you all to speak up as an informed advocate. You guys showed up today to learn more about what's going on. So now we have been having the briefings up until now. Now is our opportunity to show up, as this is an interactive session. You can speak before council. This will be happening May 21st at 6:15 p.m. at City Hall in downtown Atlanta.
I also will mention that you can attend that virtually. So if you're interested in hearing and seeing what's happening, if you'd like to come and make remarks, I would encourage you to do so. And I believe they have an online way that you can provide input, but it is a good experience to just kind of see who shows up and to get the full experience. And also we'll mention a number of folks on this call have put out our email addresses. And if you've never done it before and you have questions, this becomes a place to understand. This is not. This is a place that coming there with your authentic self is appreciated, and it's something that I would encourage folks to start to learn how to find your voice in these types of opportunities. So I would encourage folks to show up.
Yes, definitely. You can actually watch this on many different platforms, from Facebook to YouTube, as well as on the city's website. I will send out a follow-up email that will include just this information as well as the links to those platforms so that you can have access to them. And yeah, like Michael said, show your true authentic self, share your voice, share your story. This is what needs to be heard. You have 2-3 minutes, Michael? Yes, you have a few minutes to the platform to share your thoughts. We have a question from Micah.
Hey, y'all. Really appreciate you being here. I know the Park Pride people well. It's great to see so many wonderful Atlantans in a room together. I'm trying to think how to phrase this question. It was kind of touched on more in the transportation talks about we need more project managers in the Department of Transportation and how money is actually getting executed. And I'm in the dark on some things, but a lot of the Moving Atlanta Forward funding for parts was not executed well in the past couple of years. And I think part of it is the parts department just had a whole lot of money dumped on them that they didn't know how to handle. Do we see that improving in the next few years as Commissioner Cutler builds up the department, the service and everything, but also project management and be able to execute on large projects like that? That's probably to Michael.
Yeah. And I guess I'll answer the question to say, I think this is a real area, both an opportunity and a challenge. And I think it is something that we're seeing in Parks and Recreation, much as we're seeing it in some of the other departments. The Moving Atlanta Forward bond had $150 million of Parks and Recreation improvements. There have been some staffing changes within the department that also have been a challenge, and they're in the process of kind of rebuilding on that front. I also will share that there was an announcement last couple weeks ago over some changes in the administration, and I noticed that Peter Amen was named as the Chief Strategy Officer, and in that role, it identified dealing with issues on the watershed side of things with the RM Clayton plant, and also the change in leadership that has just taken place with the watershed commissioner. But it specifically also mentioned Moving Atlanta Forward as an area to focus on. So I do think that there is going to be increased scrutiny, particularly as we head towards an election year, of looking at percentage complete and what is the capacity to move forward to implement projects. And I do know that the Parks Department has had a phased approach, and you can kind of look in to find out where projects fit within that effort. So it isn't just the idea that they all happen all at once. So there is a sequencing, but I do think the fact that there have been some struggles on kind of keeping up with the demand on managing projects is something that we're seeing in Parks and Recreation as well. And I think it's something that as we're kind of moving forward and building the department we need to build the parks that we need, is going to be an ongoing challenge and one that we need to continue to engage on.
Thank you for that question, Micah. And thank you, Michael. We have a question from Antoine.
Yes, hello. Just about the park and recs. How many parks is it, and how many parks have you guys already, I guess, remodeled already? That was in the budget already.
You're having me diving into the budget document because it has a listing of all the parks that are in the system. I do know that there was reference to acquiring 83 additional 83 additional acres of parkland. But your question over the number of parks,
I want to say
I
300.
don't have.
You
Go
say
ahead, Vanessa.
300?
About 300 parks in total, and within the Atlanta Department of Parks and Recs inventory.
Yeah, the budget document says 378, but I imagine those could also be the little pocket parks and little traffic islands and other sort of things as well.
And both are correct. So yes, that does include the smaller parks that are covered through our Adopt a Park program, but it also I'll share with us with Park Pride. We work with about 150 friends groups that work with over 200 parks. That includes not just the work we do in Atlanta, but also in DeKalb. In terms of our efforts, we are not in a point of full saturation where we're working with all the different parks that are out there, but we do have active efforts in every council district and every MPU.
Okay, so do they, is it one park per year, or how, like, is it multiple parks at the same time being remodeled?
There are multiple parks that are being remodeled, and there are new parks that are coming online. There are comprehensive renovations that are happening within parks, and then specific amenities that are happening in different areas. So in our efforts, we earlier this year announced 38 different parks that were receiving some level of funding and support over this year. So 38 different locations that are receiving funding through Park Pride that also have, in many cases, city funding and things along those lines. I mentioned the Moving Atlanta Forward bond program that had a very large list of projects. So no, it isn't a one a year kind of thing. It is looking at a full court press of moving forward with investments and planned that are happening all throughout the city. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Antoine. Are there any other questions? We still have some time. So we wanted to pose a question to you all after hearing from our presenters. We have our, juices flowing. Who might you invite to engage on the budget, and why should they care? If you just want to think about that, if you want to drop your response in the chat, you're welcome to do so. Also, who do you know who might we invite to our next Informed Advocate briefing? When we first opened up, I shared if you might have any ideas of other themes we would cover. So if you wanted to share that, other themes, or who else should we invite to speak, please let us know. We have Facebook groups. Yeah, I don't know if any of you all are involved with your NPU or community groups. A lot of them are very active on Facebook or on Instagram. Many of them show up and show out, which is great because we won't know what each neighborhood needs unless we hear from them. Awesome. Want to hear from city council members?
To Michael's comment about intersection transportation and parts, I was thinking about the trails ATL and how that's falling under Rachel for now. It's a really cool intersection between parts communities, Propel Atlanta type communities. Be great to explore that. If I can throw out a question, when will we have the Silver Comet connector completed? Maybe Jeremiah or Jim know.
I don't know the date off the top of my head.
The things I've heard from Drew Ressler, who's a DOT cop, they're ahead of schedule, certainly. If you look at the pour from Maple Trailhead to Plant Atkinson, it's 90% done. They've got to do all the curb cuts. Certainly, you've got the turn at Plant Atkinson. This could be a bit of a change. You have the bridge work, which was really the half of the problem going from Plant Atkinson to the river, and that's done. So now that project, instead of having an end date of June 25, may have a end date at the end of this year.
That's exciting. Cool. Thanks, Jim.
Things that you know,
the comment group on Facebook. Yeah, I appreciate that.
the thing that Drew said it would be great and helpful, and this whole group right here might be perfect, is to talk about the advocacy for trying to get the rest of that rail. He would be very open on the Cobb side to extending that comet connector down the rail and across the river and across the railroad bridge. That's something they're open to, but it's not on the board right now because they don't have that from the CSX, and so that's always a longer term play, and maybe some of the people here could help out with that.
In a related place that I did want to mention to this group, I did see that Rob Bronner was on the call earlier. I'm not sure if he's still with us, but I know that there are efforts to expedite some of the Beltline construction in advance of World Cup soccer, and there have been some efforts with funding commitments to move forward with the Chattahoochee Riverlands project. So again, looking at some of the different areas that are kind of looking at some projects. So one with Riverlands that's kind of new on the agenda is starting to move forward. And then with the Atlanta Beltline of moving forward with some of the different trail construction that's currently underway, that there is an announcement to move forward at a more aggressive schedule to try and get things done by that deadline. So again, as folks are looking at how to get things done, the phrase "companies coming" I found is something that sometimes is a rallying cry for Atlanta and for advocates that are thinking about your issue. There are ways to think about the experience for people coming to Atlanta and then going back to say what they thought of Atlanta, and how do we use that as a chance to move for changes, not just for those visitors, but for the people who live here year round.
Thank you. And Antoine, do you have a question, a comment?
Yes, about the Atlanta budget for the schools. Y'all said that was separate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's with their budget? How many schools is that broke down for in their budget, and what's public record?
So they have roughly 60 different schools or campuses. I can send you a more sort of detailed breakdown.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, and the budget for with the schools, is that for renovation, staff, or just overall?
So they, like the budget I presented for the city of Atlanta, they both have operating expenses. So making sure they're paying teachers and the cafeteria staff, paying for school supplies, as well as a capital budget for the renovation or construction of school buildings.
Okay. All right, thanks. You say you're gonna send me a breakdown, so I guess that was my question. All right, thank y'all.
Yep.
All right.
I also included a link in the chat directly from APS, the Atlanta Public Schools Department, to kind of give you an idea, Antoine. Alrighty. So if there aren't any more questions, I want to again thank you all so much for taking the time to be out here with us today. Kyle, Jeremiah, Michael, I really appreciate it. Supportive staff from CCI as well as from Propel ATL. We have some staff members from Park Pride in the building. Also want to shout out our Park Stewardship Academy graduates, Micah. Thank you. We have some Friends of the Park group members I see. Saba, who is from my park that I frequent, Deerwood Park and PUP. So I want to say thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. You have Michael's email there. I will be following up with you all via email with additional information and resources. Don't be a stranger. We're here to support you. We're here to work together. And we hope that you will join us again for another Informed Advocate session. I really appreciate it. Hope everyone has a good night and weekend. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
It's loyal.